This happened when I was 7 years old, and it has stuck with me throughout my entire life. Only people I've ever told was my girlfriend, years ago, and another friend who I no longer talk to. Other than those two people, I've kept this encounter private, for obvious reasons. I was playing a game with my father and sister in the living room of our home. My grandmother was there too, sitting and watching. The game was that my father would lay on his back, lift his feet, and then tuck them into a squat so my sister or myself could sit down on it and be pushed off, and we would leap into the air and land on our feet, laughing. I remember giggling hysterically and saying higher, and so he pushed me off harder and I lost control and went higher into the air and came down on the wrong side up, smacking him to my head, and it shook the house. My grandmother was upset, and I stood there as everyone got to their feet and surrounded me. It was in that moment when you're shocked and not going to cry, but it hurts, and you're stunned before you realize what happened and finally start crying. It ended up being a concussion. After a hospital visit, scans, and my father was told not to let me sleep and watch me closely, my head in the weeks that followed swelled like a big egg. But it was in that moment right after the impact before crying. Over on the table next to the sofa were standing two blue men. No more than 10 inches in height. They seemed to stand tall, or rather proud, like warriors. Their legs and arms were thin. I could see mild knobs of their knees and elbows. There wasn't much fat on them. They were both very lean. I could make out a slight muscle tone too, on their bare chests and arms. They were both wearing grass skirts, like something you'd see in a primitive native tribe, but the grass seemed wet, like seaweed, and had a bit of soppy, squishy lake bed look about it. One of the men was wearing a hat, like an old-style cap, darker red in color, almost like wine-colored. The other one, I could see his hair more clearly, and it was long, unkempt, with pieces of coming down on his face and covering his ears. The one without the hat was holding a long spear in his hand. The base of the spear was resting on the ground and the pole came up to almost his full length, with a carved pointy stone on its top. It was a fast, momentary image, and the scene in the living room quickly turned to panic after I hit the floor and my family crowded around me, and once I began to cry, I never saw the two little men again. But I never forgot that image. It felt like they had been there longer than just that short moment when I could see them with my eyes. There was something sinister feeling about the way they confidently stood there and stared at me. It was clear they were not afraid of me or the fact that I could see them. At the age of 7, this was in the 80s, all I could compare them to were evil Smurfs. The one's red cap even reminded me of Papa Smurf a bit, but they weren't shaped like Smurfs, and that's where the comparison fell short. I have always been good at drawing, and at one point, a few years later, I tried to draw them because I was afraid I might forget what they looked like in their details. I'm not really sure what happened to that drawing though. Last note, warp ahead to the early 2000s. I started Googling it and researching stuff trying to find more info on the little blue men. I uncovered a picture of a painting from hundreds of years ago. It looked like an illustration in a book or something, on some academic website. It was little blue men tearing apart a library and causing mayhem, and I think it was called the Blue Men, or something like that. In red caps and the same stature and build. They were so strikingly similar to what I saw, that's when I actually had the nerve to tell the story to one of my friends. Since then, I've never been able to find that picture online again. All I ever find now are the Blue Man Group and other unrelated things. I almost get the feeling that they don't want to be found. Has anyone else ever had anything like this or seen anything similar? So I recently vividly revisited a memory, but with a brand new detail that I never remembered before, and it was far more vivid than I can ever remember things. In around 2008 or 2009, my friend was spending the night at my house. We were in 4th grade at the time. It was dead of night. It was pitch black in the house and outside except for the backyard light. We walk into the living room and see a pair of eyes under the shed. That's how we've always remembered it. The same exact thing happened with a different friend a few years later. The other night, however, I very vividly was back in that memory. Instead of eyes under the shed, there was this 7 or 8 foot tall thing. Its arms were way too long and it looked like something quadrupedal, but on 2 legs instead. It was very skinny and had a head that was mostly humanoid, just a bit longer towards the bottom. The entire head was completely featureless and white. It had antlers. It just was standing there staring at us. I asked both my friends if they had seen it, and individually they both said that they don't remember that. But I get this uneasy feeling and could see fragments of the exact thing I vividly saw. I don't know. All 3 of us can only picture it in like little tiny fragments though. Some of us just remember the eyes, some of us remember the arms, and some of us, like myself, remember everything. This happened in North Texas, by the way, in a suburb, and a creek ran right next to my house. If anybody might have any idea of what this creature could be, or if it's just a wild imagination of a kid, please comment down below and let me know. So, timeline. This was around 2015. Not sure what month, but it was around 11 at night. I was driving from my dad's place to my mom's. I said this a couple of times now, but my dad has 75 acres of spooky land where most of my stories take place. Anyway, I was driving. I had just started down the long driveway when I felt like I was being watched. Not cool, but it happens more often than you would believe. I'm nearing the highway when I see a dark shape at the edge of the woods. Oh well, probably a deer. I shake it off. We have tons of wildlife in the area, from deer to panthers to the occasional bear, and then it starts chasing me. Keep in mind, please, that this stuff is practically normal in my mind. I have tons of weird stuff that happens, and it's not like it was just barreling at me. It just moved after my car, staying at the edge of the woods. So, I keep my pace. I turn onto the highway and speed up to 50 or so. I keep noticing something in my peripheral though, so I slow down and start looking for what it could be. A few yards behind me, I see this huge dog. I grew up with larger dogs. My aunt had a Saint Bernard mix growing up, and I have had various large dogs. This thing was literally the size of my car. I know I mentioned bears before, but bears don't chase cars, and we only have black bears, which are pretty much the most docile kind. Now, I'm freaking out. I gun it, releasing a long stream of curses and telling my car to get over it. It was poorly kept 95 Honda Accord. I had tons of trouble with it dying on me, so anytime I had to push it, I made sure to speak kindly to it. I didn't care at this point. I was simply trying not to die. I seemingly can't shake it for too long. So, in an act of bravery, or stupidity, I pull over in a church parking lot, thinking maybe it's some sort of hell beast and it won't come into the light or onto church land. I was very wrong. I stopped to get my phone out to call my boyfriend. In that span of time, it catches up and jumps onto my car. I can see and feel and hear the metal popping and creaking, and I can see drool splatter onto my windshield. I scream, dropping my phone. It jumps off my car and onto the hood, where I get a glimpse of it before it gets off into the cemetery and disappears. It was definitely a dog, but like a Rottweiler pit mix or something, but it was darker and much, much larger. It was solid black with paws the size of dinner plates. It had a huge head, almost the size of my car windows. I don't know why it decided to leave me alone, but it did, and I'm so thankful for that. I called my boyfriend crying, and he calmed me down and listened, and he told me when I got home I should take pictures, and I did, or at least I tried. By the time I got to my mom's, the only thing that was left was a single dent in the roof of my car, and some faint claw marks that were more like indentations in the metal.